You know what your problem is, Nicole? Mark said, leaning back in the leather chair like he'd just discovered gravity. You still think rules matter. That's how it began. No preamble. No HR rep with a tissue box. Just Mark, CEO, king of buzzwords, a man who thought due diligence was a brand of probiotic yogurt, grinning like he'd just solved the company's biggest problem by removing me. We were in the smaller of the two conference rooms, one with the flickering fluorescent bulb that always made me feel like I was being interrogated in a Cold War bunker. Mark had chosen it on purpose. Intimate humiliation. That's the flavor of narcissism he preferred, quiet, unrecorded, plausibly deniable. You've become redundant, he added, clasping his hands like a pastor delivering a eulogy for my career. We're streamlining, speed over bureaucracy, vision over obstacles. You get it, right? No, I didn't get it, because when I joined Patriotic Systems, it was a mid-level defense tech firm clawing its way toward legitimacy. We had 3 clients and a server room that doubled as a janitor closet. I built the compliance division from scratch. Audits, vendor vetting, risk matrices, internal policy frameworks, all of it. I was the firewall between their greed and federal prison. Somewhere between Series C funding and Mark's texts talk about disruption through bold instinct, I became inconvenient. He slid the folder across the table like it was a birthday card. Standard release, 6 weeks severance. Generous, really. Considering what, Mark? That you were about to override every control I ever put in place and fake your way through government contract bids like you were clicking through terms and conditions on a software install. I didn't say that. I didn't say anything. Instead, I looked at the folder, then at him, and I let the silence stretch until his smile wavered just a flicker, but I saw it. I stood, gathered my things, just a phone, my badge, and a small leather notebook, and walked out of the room. No box, no tears. Just gravity in my chest and a quiet certainty in my mind. Because I knew something Mark didn't. See, a few months earlier, during his automation sprint, ordered me to push a new system live, an AI-based contract validator meant to eliminate bottlenecks in our federal submission workflows. He wanted speed. I wanted cover. So I buried a small, very specific requirement deep in the level 1 validation code, a 2-factor cryptographic signature, one that couldn't be cloned, forwarded, or bypassed, one tied only to me. When he rubber-stamped the rollout, waving away my warnings as compliance theater, he unknowingly sealed his own fate. All I had to do was walk away. Anyway, if you're still listening to this, I appreciate you. Seriously, turns out 97% of you watching aren't even subscribed. Wild, right? I'm trying to hit my first 10,000 subscribers, and every click helps me prove that quiet professionals do get the last word. So if you're enjoying this, smash that red button like it's a fraudulent contract on Mark's desk. Back to it. As the elevator doors closed behind me for the last time, I didn't feel relief. Not yet. I felt erased. A woman in her late 40s who had built a career on integrity and fine print policies suddenly shoved into the discard pile because she wouldn't nod along to shortcuts. I walked to my car in a daze. The garage was half empty. Nobody said goodbye. At a stoplight, I checked my email. My corporate access had already been revoked. I couldn't even log into my own documentation. Typical, but in the back of my mind, a thought ticked like a metronome. He can't fake that signature. No one can, and eventually someone's gonna ask why. The house was too quiet. Not peaceful, sterile, like the kind of quiet you get in a hospital room after someone flatlines and the nurses haven't come in yet. I sat at the kitchen table in my pajamas Tuesday, Thursday. The cup of coffee I'd reheated twice and never drank. My laptop screen glared back at me with another tab full of euphemistic job listings. Nimble culture. Resilient mindset. Must thrive in ambiguity. Translation, we want someone who will smile while the floor collapses. Every click felt like a paper cut on my resume. I had 2 degrees, 15 years of experience, certifications up the ass, and I was being ghosted by companies run by people who still thought compliance meant copy-pasting legalese from ChatGPT. One listing literally said, "We prefer doers over thinkers." I slammed the lid shut. The sound echoed through the kitchen like a pistol shot. My cat blinked at me from the windowsill. At least he didn't think I was redundant. That night, I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for something special. Well, here it was, my own damn pity party. As the clock ticked past midnight and my inbox stayed empty, I started replaying my last few months at Patriotics, trying to pinpoint when the guillotine had started to drop. And one project kept circling back like a vulture. The efficiency software. Mark's pet obsession. He'd read some clickbait article about AI-based procurement streamlining and decided we needed to modernize our contract workflow before the next quarterly investor call. Never mind that we were handling sensitive government deals. Never mind that federal contracts require airtight authentication. He wanted something flashy, automated, frictionless, he said. I pushed back, once, and he gave me that look like I was a stubborn Roomba refusing to go under the couch, so I did what he wanted, but on my terms. I buried a requirement deep in the code. Not just MFA, not just digital certs. A chained cryptographic hash. Timestamp locked, keyed to a level 1 compliance credential, mine, and not just any key. One issued through a federal authorization pathway that required in-person ID verification, biometric input, and a secondary offline token rotation. Basically, a fingerprint encrypted inside a maze inside a vault. Mark didn't ask questions, didn't care. I told him it was an essential compliance standard for defense-grade submissions. Used words like procurement integrity and zero trust validation. His eyes glazed over halfway through, and he just said, "Yeah, sure, ship it." We rolled it out 2 weeks before I was fired. They thought they were launching a shortcut, but they'd activated a Deadman switch. Now, sitting there in the kitchen with Merlot on my tongue and resentment like battery acid in my stomach, I felt something strange under the humiliation, relief. No more fighting uphill. No more smiling through meetings where men named Chad explained ethics to me using metaphors about football. But I also felt something darker. I wanted to watch it all collapse. Not just justice, not just accountability. I wanted Mark to choke on the consequences of ignoring me. And when the day came, and I knew it would, he'd realize his empire was resting on one tiny, invisible hinge. A signature he couldn't fake, a credential he didn't own, and a woman he'd erased. I hadn't planned on becoming the library lady. But 2 months after Mark's little coup de smug, I found myself behind a beige desk at the Westboro Public Library, wearing a cardigan I didn't remember buying and explaining, for the fourth time that week, how to open an email attachment without deleting the entire inbox. "Click the paperclip," I said slowly, pointing at the monitor. "The paperclip? Where?" the woman asked, squinting like the screen might start whispering secrets if she stared long enough. "Bottom corner." "No, the other bottom, left side." "Oh, I see it, you're so good at this," she beamed, absolutely elated by her own success. I smiled. Genuinely, something about the victory felt pure. Ridiculous, but pure. She left with a printed coupon for 20% off rotisserie chicken and a feeling of digital mastery. I stayed behind, staring at her now empty screen, when a memory slithered up from the deep. Mark, leaning over my desk, breathing espresso and entitlement. "This whole cryptographic handshake thing, is it necessary?" he'd asked, like a toddler poking a toaster with a fork. "Yes," I said without looking up. "It's a compliance protocol for level 1 contract submission. Without it, any approval would be legally non-binding." He made a noise in his throat, something between a scoff and a burp. "Can you, simplify it? Document it in plain English? Something IT can follow?" I looked at him, blinked once, then lied through my teeth. "For security reasons, the final key authorization should be administered manually and left undocumented. If we publish it, we increase the risk of internal compromise. Best practice. Standard NIST recommendation." He didn't even pretend to understand. Just nodded and clapped my shoulder like I'd explained the rules of Uno. "Fine, fine, let's push it. We'll say it's a Tier 4 protocol or whatever." Investors eat that up, and that was it. The last gate left intentionally undocumented. A phantom step. One only I could perform because only I knew it existed. Back in the library, I sipped my lukewarm tea and stared out the dusty window at a parking lot filled with sun-faded sedans. It was quiet. Peaceful, even. The opposite of what my life used to be: corner offices, fluorescent buzz, 12-tab spreadsheets, red-eye flights to DC for compliance briefings. Now I spent afternoons alphabetizing paperbacks and helping retirees download TikTok so they could watch their grandkids floss dance. And weirdly, I didn't hate it. I wasn't running uphill against people who treated laws like suggestions. I wasn't bending my spine into corporate pretzels to keep idiots out of prison. I was breathing. But still, in the back of my mind, I kept that last conversation with Mark preserved like a bug in amber. He hadn't even tried to understand the tool I built. He was too busy speedrunning his own ego. Which meant that when the first cracks started to show, when the system he fast-tracked began to push back, there'd be no one left who knew where the final switch was hidden. And certainly no one who could flip it. It was a Tuesday or a Wednesday. At the library, they all blur into one long soft shoe shuffle of overdue DVDs and confused uncles asking how to get the Google to turn on. I was restocking the large print mystery shelf when my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. "David L. wants to connect." Data entry Dave. Sweet guy. Used to bring in donuts on Fridays and kept a mini whiteboard on his desk that said "Do not poke the bear," with an arrow pointed at his own name. The kind of guy who always stayed 5 feet clear of corporate politics, but somehow knew every single thing happening in the office within 48 hours. I accepted the request, and less than a minute later, the message popped up. "Dave, hey, sorry to bother you. Quick weird question, do you remember how the contract approval validator logs user actions? Is there a way to see who authenticated a document, not just when?" I stared at the screen. Heart rate didn't spike. Not yet, but the edges of my world shifted just a bit. A familiar old instinct kicked in like a smoke alarm sniffing something faint but acrid. "Me, you mean the new AI system Mark pushed through?" "Dave, yeah, that one. We've got a preliminary state review happening. Feels sudden, everyone's tense. I'm just trying to get ahead of any questions." Preliminary state review. That was the term they used before an audit turned official. Like a dog sniffing the perimeter of a crime scene before the hounds came in. "Me, is this about the federal contracts?" "Dave, zipper mouth face, I didn't say that. But yeah, there's a LOT of paper pulling happening. Legal's been camped out in the dock vault for 2 days. Mark is losing it. I couldn't stop the grin that curled at the corner of my mouth. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even vindication. It was something colder, like watching a glacier shift just enough to know the avalanche had begun. Me, weird, thought the whole point of the streamlining was to avoid all this red tape. Dave, don't shoot the messenger lol, just trying to remember who built the damn system in the first place. Didn't you insist on something fancy for high-level approvals? Me, I might have, I left it there. No explanations, no breadcrumbs, because if they were asking now, it meant the software had done its job, flagged something, blocked it outright, and no one knew how to override it because no one had ever read the security layers I'd built. They all just nodded, clicked, and assumed the machine would obey. Except now the machine had started saying no. That night I sat in bed, scrolling through old documentation I'd saved out of pure paranoia. Not the actual code, never took that with me, but enough to remember the structure. Enough to remember the lock I'd quietly installed on the back door. Dave's message ran through my head on a loop. Mark is losing it. Good, he should be. I was in the middle of Walmart, trying to decide between the off-brand dishwasher pods and the Ultra Mega Blast ones that cost $3 more, when my phone buzzed with a news alert. I almost ignored it, figured it was another celebrity divorce or a recall on lettuce. But something about the wording made me look. Patriotic systems under federal investigation for contract irregularities. Sources say I froze. Right there in aisle 9 between a shelf of discounted turkey basters and a toddler screaming at Paw Patrol vitamins. The headline felt like a bullet I didn't see coming until it hit, clean, sudden, oddly satisfying. The article itself was thin. Vague statements. Anonymous sources confirm. Ongoing review. Questions raised regarding authentication pathways in federal procurement. But I didn't need details. I knew. I could see it all play out behind my eyes like a documentary narrated by Karma herself. Mark, in his corner office, probably yelling into a Bluetooth headset that wasn't connected. Legal in a cold sweat, flipping through half-finished spreadsheets and printouts. Some poor middle manager scrambling to find a PDF that never existed because the last step. The real one was never documented, never delegated, and never designed to be faked. A level 1 signature had been applied post-termination. That's what triggered it. It had to be. The system cross-checked credentials with HR databases. It saw a ghost where there should have been a living user. It sounded the alarm the way I'd trained it to. And now the feds were listening. I leaned on my cart and exhaled through a laugh that startled the elderly man browsing denture adhesive to my right. He looked at me like I'd just slipped on reality. Maybe I had, because suddenly all that humiliation, Mark's smug grin, the we're streamlining speech, the 6 weeks of severance wrapped like a participation trophy, shifted in my brain. This wasn't a loss. This was a long play. I straightened up, dumped the cheap pods into my cart, and started walking with purpose, like someone who just remembered the rest of the chessboard. People talk about closure like it's some quiet moment. A sunset, a heart-to-heart. No. Closure is hearing sirens behind the office that fired you and knowing, you planted the damn tripwire they just stepped on. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel discarded or invisible. I felt like the last sane person in a burning asylum, watching through the smoke-streaked glass as everyone who laughed at me finally realized the fire doors were welded shut. In my mind, I saw the conference room again. Same beige walls, same dying ficus in the corner, same warped painting of a lighthouse being battered by waves, probably some desperate metaphor for resilience. But this time, Mark wasn't smirking. This time, the table was lined with auditors. Federal ones, blazers, laptops, notepads filled with acronyms and phrases like chain of custody and fraudulent intent. One of them, the quiet type, the kind who notices fingerprints on coffee cups, was probably already matching timestamps to badge scans, syncing every contract approval against my termination date like they were assembling a puzzle made of red flags. They always start polite. Cordial, soft voices, tight smiles. But make no mistake, once they start seizing servers, not there to give advice, they're there to build a case. I was wiping down a cart handle at the library, small town flu panic, don't ask, when my phone buzzed again. Dave, okay, this is officially nuts. They're cloning drives, like literally unplugging servers and walking out with them. Mark's losing his mind. Nobody's allowed to talk to media. All staff meeting canceled. Half the execs have locked their doors. My pulse quickened, but not from fear. It was electricity. The slow, cold kind. Like hearing thunder and knowing your lightning started it. Me, what are they after? Dave, they keep asking about high-value contracts. All the big ones signed after you left. I heard one of the auditors say the sequence doesn't complete. Whatever that means, I knew exactly what it meant. That damn system, my system, was built to do one thing, detect inconsistencies in federal submissions. And the highest tier contracts, ones over a certain dollar threshold, they needed a level 1 compliance officer's signature chain to lock. Not just a name typed into a field, a full cryptographic handshake, time-locked, credential-stamped, immutable. And apparently someone, who could it be, had been slapping his John Hancock on documents the system no longer recognized as valid, because I wasn't there anymore. because I was the only one who could have completed the handshake. And I hadn't. Dave, people are freaking. They're calling it a fatal gap in the approval trail. I'm staying the hell out of the line of fire. But man, it's bad. I walked outside and stood in the cold for a few minutes, watching the wind slap dead leaves across the pavement. There's something eerily serene about knowing a storm's hitting someone else for once. That same room where Mark smirked and told me I was obsolete was now full of men in gray suits dissecting his digital crimes with surgical calm. I could see him sweating, jaw twitching, trying to explain how a contract that cleared internally still didn't validate externally. Because the machine wasn't confused. It was doing its job. It was saying, this shouldn't be possible. And someone finally was listening. The message from Dave came in at 6:42 a.m. on a Saturday. I hadn't even had coffee yet. I was still in bed, half buried under a tangle of sheets in the dead weight of my cat, who decided my ribcage was the warmest spot on earth. Dave, it's official. They've zeroed in on one contract. Multi-million-dollar DoD thing. Passed every check except one. Signature block through a validation fault. System flagged it as incomplete authentication event. I sat up. My cat thumped off my chest with an indignant MRRP. I knew that phrase. I wrote that phrase. It was hard-coded in the validator's error messages for one very specific circumstance. When the final cryptographic handshake failed due to the absence of a valid credential. Not expired. Not incorrect. Absent. Dave, they tried to force verify it, even brought in a third-party IT forensics team. No dice. Director of IT got canned on the spot. I almost choked on nothing. Fired, that poor guy. He'd been more wallpaper than war criminal. But he was the unlucky soul who had to explain to the feds why their $1 million contract didn't pass digital muster and couldn't be made to. Because my system didn't just flag anomalies, it locked them. You couldn't fake the key. You couldn't backdate it. You couldn't override it without leaving forensic fingerprints a mile wide. And now apparently someone had tried. Dave, Mark's name is being tossed around in unflattering contexts. Heard forgery twice. Falsifying federal documentation once. Everyone's pretending they don't know who signed what. He followed that with one final sentence that read like a slow exhale. Dave, they figured out the signature needed to come from a role that doesn't exist anymore. There it was. The trap had fully snapped shut. Somewhere in that soulless maze of cubicles and corporate panic, federal auditor had finally drawn a red circle around the timestamp of a signature that should not have been possible. They'd pulled the HR logs. They'd seen the termination date. They'd seen the system's refusal to recognize the approval as valid, no matter how many times it was reprocessed or pushed or brute-forced by IT. And they'd finally asked, who had the authority to sign this? Answer, me. Problem, I didn't work there anymore. Bigger problem, I never gave anyone access to the one element that mattered most. Mark had built his entire empire on speed and spin and plausible deniability. But compliance isn't about speed, it's about certainty. And there is nothing more certain than a locked cryptographic handshake tied to a credential that doesn't and can't exist anywhere else. I pictured him pacing that same hallway where I used to give ethics briefings, tearing at his tie, snapping at staff, desperately trying to find anyone, who could explain to a room full of government agents why the system was accusing him of forging reality. Spoiler, they couldn't, because I made sure of it. They had the receipts now. Every time a federal contract is submitted, it leaves behind a trail like oil on water. Not just a who and when, but a how. The method, the path, the signature chain. It's not just digital ink, it's a living fingerprint, stamped in encrypted blood. And now the auditors were holding up that fingerprint and realizing it belonged to a ghost. It started with the timestamp. A single contract, $18.4 million, defense logistics, expedited delivery clause. Mark's name was on the final line, scribbled in self-importance like he was signing the Declaration of Independence. But below that, buried in the metadata, the system showed something strange. The compliance handshake had been executed at 2:14 p.m. on a Thursday. The same Thursday I'd been at home, in sweatpants, watching Judge Judy reruns and wondering whether I should repaint my hallway or just burn the house down and start over. The signature wasn't just tied to the role of compliance officer. It was tied to my credential. Mine, Nicole M. Caldwell. Employee ID #039487. Terminated officially and digitally 13 days prior to the contract's timestamp. That's when things started to really go sideways, because Mark had already given his testimony, sworn affidavit, said on record that he personally reviewed, approved, and finalized that contract. He didn't just sign it, he vouched for it, in triplicate, with his lawyer in the room. Problem was, the system wouldn't back him up. In fact, was accusing him of executing a cryptographic action he couldn't have, because he never had the key. Because that key was destroyed the moment I turned in my badge and walked out of that building. They knew it now. I imagined the realization settling in during some closed-door meeting, one auditor flipping through logs, another scrolling through the HR termination list, someone else holding the forensics report. Then that quiet moment, one where no one speaks because the answer is so clear it almost feels rude to say it out loud. This wasn't a software glitch. This was a trap, deliberate, precise. Ethical even depending on your definition of vengeance. The signature didn't belong to Mark, it never could, and if he didn't sign it, then who did? And if no one did, then what the hell were they looking at? I pictured their faces when it finally clicked. The software didn't fail. It worked exactly as designed. And someone they hadn't bothered to interview yet, someone no longer on the org chart, had left behind a signature-shaped knife just waiting to twist. The letter arrived in one of those heavy cream envelopes that practically radiates bureaucracy. Thick paper, no return address, red ink on the seal. Registered mail. Signed delivery. I accepted it from the mail carrier with the same hands I once used to draft ethics policies no one read. Inside, formal language, tight margins, and a letterhead that said Office of the Inspector General in font that somehow felt like a middle finger in Times New Roman. I read it twice. Once as Nicole the civilian. Then again as Nicole the ex-compliance officer, scanning every word like it was evidence. They wanted to schedule a call, a clarification interview. 10 minutes later the phone rang. Blocked number, I answered. Miss Caldwell, the voice said. Calm, male, flat accent, like someone trained not to betray origin or opinion. Yes, this is Special Agent Lanning, Office of the Inspector General. We're reviewing internal validation inconsistencies connected to Federal Contract 74B, issued through Patriotic Systems. Do you have a few minutes to confirm a few employment details? I do. Excellent. Can you confirm you were employed by Patriotics as their lead compliance officer? Yes. Can you confirm the termination date listed in your HR file, March 17th, 11:46 a.m., is accurate? It is. Pause. Miss Caldwell, according to the Federal Validator logs, Contract 74B includes a Level 1 cryptographic signature associated with your credential ID. That signature was timestamped March 30th, 2 weeks after your departure. However, the CEO's physical sign-off occurred several hours later that same day. He took a breath, then asked it, the question everything had been leading to. Can you explain how he could have possibly used your signature? I held the phone in one hand, the letter in the other, and used my free fingers to lift my coffee mug to my lips. I took the slowest sip of my life, let the silence stretch just long enough to be noticed. Then I said, clear as glass, he couldn't have. Another pause. I could hear him lean forward. Subtle shift of fabric and posture that always comes when someone realizes they're about to get the real story. Now, I said, setting the mug down with a soft clink, let's talk about the system I built. I heard him shuffle papers, because they already knew, they had the audit trail. The signature metadata, the HR logs, the failed override attempts. The IT director's resignation email, probably flagged with passive-aggressive caps lock panic. But what they didn't have, what no one had, was the last missing piece, intent. I could give them that. I could walk them through every protocol I implemented, every red flag I buried inside that system like digital landmines, every choice I made to protect the integrity of those contracts from the very man who laughed when he fired me. I wasn't angry anymore, not even smug. I was ready. Mark once told me that compliance was just a formality, that oversight was a luxury companies couldn't afford if they wanted to grow fast. But now he was staring down federal indictment because he'd tried to bypass the one person in the company who understood what a real signature meant. And by the time I finished testifying, he'd learned that you don't get to cut corners and call it strategy. Sometimes the paper pushers push back, and when they do, they don't miss. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit him.